kind of fights that might break out here or there. And this is really what's happening now in some parts of central London, in Chinatown and in Whitehall and in front of Westminster Station, where the police updated on its X account that it's dealing with many counter-protesters who are rioting in these areas. Anyway, people who are demonstrating and participating in this march, they are reasserting and again calling for an immediate ceasefire. They don't want to come out again in the streets of London next week. They want this Saturday to be the last one marching here.
Right. Mohammed, there were reports earlier of skirmishes between far-right protesters and the police there. Can you tell us about what type of police presence there is today at this pro-Palestine, this demonstration in support of Palestinians?
Yeah, there were some chants from these counter-protesters, as the police described them. They were chanting they want their country back. They think they were not allowed to demonstrate and to commemorate the Armistice Day and the Remembrance Day this weekend because of these Palestinian pro-Palestinian marches. And the organizers of this march, they accuse the political leaders of inciting these kind of counter-protests. Anyway, there's no record of any arrest among the demonstrators in the pro-Palestinian march, but there are some reports indeed from the Metropolitan Police of arresting a number of counter-protesters in areas in Whitehall, in Chinatown, and in front of Westminster Station. But there's no direct contact so far between the protesters and counter-protesters. All these skirmishes and fights have broken out between the policemen themselves and the counter-protesters.
All right, thank you very much for that update, Mohammed Al-Madoun, with the latest there from that huge demonstration in support of Palestinians, which is currently underway in the British capital, London. And a protest in support of Palestine is also taking place in Brussels. Let's now speak to Simon Mutqueen, who is a member of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Belgian Parliament and is at the demonstration. Can you tell us, sir, first, why you wanted to be at this demonstration in Brussels today?
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm very glad to be here because here it's a very important day for us. Here we are thousands of people in Brussels, and as a political leaders, I'm very proud to be in this country who voted in favor to cease fire in UN 2 weeks ago. But now this is the ask of the wish of the people here today. We need to take measure. We need to take more measure. We need to take sanction against Israel. We need to take sanction to end this occupation politics of Israel since decades. And this is why I'm very happy and very glad to be here. And I also want to add that I'm here because we want to send hope to all Palestinian people who are suffering right now.
Right. As you mentioned, the Belgium voted in the General Assembly in support of the resolution there. But the Belgian government and the European as a whole has expressed steadfast support for Israel in its conflict in Gaza. And you want sanctions imposed on the far-right Israeli government for, you say, what it is committing right now in Gaza. But how do you convince them to do this? How, right now it seems that the Europeans and Belgium in particular are still siding with the Israelis, still think Israel, and they say, has a right to defend itself. How do you convince these governments that sanctions should be applied against these Israeli governments?
I think, I want to give some hope. I think it's moving now in Europe. The speech are moving. If you compare it to the first day of the attack on Gaza, and now we can see that all the political leaders, they are understanding that they maybe did a mistake when they say that they can let Israel do what they want. And now you can see that even in France, even in Ireland, in Belgium, in Spain, that we have countries who take some action. I cannot promise you that it's going to be like in a few days or few weeks, but I can feel, because I'm struggling for Palestinian people since now 20 years, but now I can feel that we can speak about sanction. Before I was maybe the only one, and now we have also some right parties who speak about sanction, but also, for example, to recognize Palestine. Now this is something that a lot of people say. I think we are close to we are in front of the wall. You know, this is over. We cannot let decade like this again. We cannot let this suffering of Palestinian people go on. No, all the political leaders, I think they know that they are responsible about the situation. Why? Because we let Israel impunity during decades, and now we will take sanction. I really hope, and I will fight for that. We will take sanction against this.
Thank you so much for taking
occupation politics from Israel.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Simon Mutquin, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee in Belgium's parliament, who is taking part today in a protest in Brussels in support of Palestinians. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Well, meanwhile, France's President Emmanuel Macron has urged Israel to stop killing Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Macron made the remarks during an interview with a British TV channel. He said there was, quote, no justification for the bombing and that a ceasefire would benefit Israel. Let's bring in Alan Fisher in occupied East Jerusalem for more on this. Alan, the Israeli Prime Minister has pushed back on Macron's statements. What did he say?
Yeah, you can tell how frustrated the Israeli side is simply by the fact that they issued a statement just after midnight. Benjamin Netanyahu is saying that Hamas was responsible for what was actually happening in Gaza at the moment, that Israel was doing everything it could to avoid civilians being injured in Gaza, and once again tied Hamas to ISIS, even though experts will tell you the two organisations are almost diametrically opposite. But he also said that if Israel didn't take Hamas on now, we would see Hamas attacks in the likes of New York, London and Paris. Interestingly enough, some intelligence chiefs have been warning there is an increased chance of attacks in some places, but that's tied to what people are seeing going on in Gaza and their frustration at Western nations to not do anything to intervene. And you'll remember that immediately after October the 7th, a number of world leaders made their way to Israel to express their unequivocal support. The fact that Emmanuel Macron is now speaking out against what is happening in Gaza would suggest that perhaps that unequivocal support is starting to erode.
Right, and let's talk about, Alan, what's happening in Gaza right now. We've seen intense Israeli bombing of the northern part of the Gaza Strip, the Gaza City, which is under siege right now, the hospital at Al-Shifa. The Israelis had been saying that they would agree to these daily hour-long pauses to allow more people to move from northern Gaza to the south. But at the same time, we're seeing these intense attacks across the north today. What's the latest on these pauses?
And that's the thing you have to remember, that when they talk about having these pauses, they're very small and very selective in areas where the Israelis are comfortable in announcing those pauses in their operations there. Now, they've said that the roads are open. They'll be open for 7 hours on Saturday. That means there's about another 30 minutes giving people the opportunity to move south. Of course, this is how it's presented, but for many people it means grabbing what little they can, moving on the road, leaving their homes and some degree of certainty behind and heading towards the uncertainty in the south where they have no idea where they'll stay, how they'll eat, how they'll take care of their families and whether or not there'll be enough food and water for them there as well. So these two roads are going to be open apparently for another 30 minutes or so. And the Israeli army said that there'll be more of these pauses, but they are, as I say, incredibly localized. We are hearing that today they've been around the Jabalia refugee camp, which is actually northwest of Gaza City, but that would mean having to go past Gaza City, where, as you say, there are reports of these incredibly intensive exchanges, and that will give people second thoughts about making that journey through an area where they feel there's no guarantee that they'll be safe.
Alan, thank you very much for the update. Alan Fisher, live for us in occupied East Jerusalem. And Israeli forces have carried out another series of raids across the occupied West Bank. Army units stormed residential neighborhoods in Tulkarem, Nablus and Jenin, as well as Ramallah. Gunfire was heard on the streets. Amar Dwaik is Director General of the Palestinian Independent Commission for Human Rights in Ramallah. He says harsher tools must be used to stop what he calls the ongoing genocide in Gaza.
I think what is happening right now in Gaza is nothing short of a genocide. as stipulated in the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. This is unprecedented, and it requires also unprecedented intervention from international community. It is the collective responsibility of every and each country to the agreement, the 158 countries party to the International Convention, to intervene to prevent genocide. And they need to use harsher tools rather than condemnation and statement of sympathy to stop the ongoing genocide that is taking place in Gaza. First of all, we see like an entire failure, a humiliating failure of international humanitarian law and international law in general. Not the standards or rules, but the application and the enforcement of the law. And I think there should be a substantial review to the entire system of protection, humanitarian law, humanitarian relief, international law. This should be under scrutiny and under revision by all countries, particularly countries of the South and more vulnerable states and countries and people. We see that the law does not provide any meaningful protection. The entire international community failed to enter one drop of fuel to Gaza after 35 days of war. We are now, honestly, we are helpless. We are all the tools that at our disposal, we already use them. We see no result. And I think it is the responsibility of states, whether collectively in the multilateral forums or individually in a bilateral way, to stop the relation with Israel, to enforce sanction, to stop any economic or military or cultural collaboration or relation. And by here I mean Arab and Muslim states who are now meeting in Saudi Arabia. We expect from them to not only to condemn and to call for a ceasefire, but also to threaten or to actually decide to stop relation with Israel, because without that Israel will continue to commit the massacres and the genocide in Gaza and also in the West Bank.
Well, the United Nations Security Council has met to discuss Israeli strikes on hospitals and healthcare facilities in Gaza. The Director General of the World Health Organization pleaded for aid, saying the healthcare system is on its knees. Christine Salome reports from UN headquarters in New York.
The UN Security Council began its meeting with a moment of silence for the victims, the only action it's agreed on in 4 weeks of fighting, then turned to the spiraling health crisis in Gaza. Describing corridors crammed with the injured, the sick and dying, morgues overflowing, and surgeries without anesthesia, the head of the World Health Organization pleaded for aid.
On average, a child is killed every 10 minutes in Gaza. 1.5 million people have been displaced and are looking for shelter anywhere they can find it. But nowhere and no one is safe. Nowhere and no one is safe. As more and more people move to a smaller and smaller space, overcrowding is increasing the risks of outbreaks of diarrheal and respiratory disease and skin infections.
In addition to caring for 27,000 wounded, hospitals are trying to manage the regular health needs of more than 2 million people, including pregnant women and cancer patients, while tens of thousands of displaced people shelter there. Even as they met, Israel was bombing Gaza's biggest health facility, the Al-Shifa hospital.
They are looking at you, imploring you to act to stop another possible massacre unfolding.
Israel's been accusing Hamas fighters of sheltering near and in tunnels under hospitals, a claim contested by health workers in Gaza and independent experts. Council members also pointed to the fact that 70% of victims are women and children.
Every single one of the 2,650 currently reported as trapped under the rubble are human beings, and that more than half of them are children. But they're not just children. They're Palestine's future, and they're also Israel's future neighbors.
A number of council members called out Israel for violations of international law and lamented that the Security Council was unable to uphold peace and security. The Director General of the WHO saying it no longer serves the purpose for which it was established. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, the United Nations.
Now, in that session at the UN Security Council on Friday, the Israeli ambassador Gilad Erdan alleged that many UNRWA workers were members of Hamas.
Every number from the so-called Ministry of Health is Hamas. Many UNRWA workers in Gaza are themselves members of Hamas. The time has come to bust the myth of UN-supplied facts. This council is being spoon-fed lies by the very same terrorist organization that deliberately murdered and maimed thousands of innocent Israelis just 34 days ago. Hamas has ensured that every square meter of Gaza is under their complete reign of terror. Many ambulances drivers are Hamas members.
Well, earlier I spoke to Juliet Touma, who's the Director of Communications at UNRWA, the UN Refugee Agency for Palestinians. She said their staff are vetted by the United Nations and that staff lists are shared every year with all the parties in the conflict, including Israel.
We can confirm that over 100 of our colleagues, these are UN workers working for UNRWA, the largest UN agency working in Gaza. They have been killed. These numbers are verified by the United Nations. We ourselves at UNRWA, we verify these numbers. These are colleagues of ours. These are teachers, doctors, sanitation workers, support staff, the backbone of the organization. And they have all been vetted. They have all been cleared, not only by the UN, but also the lists of these staff members are shared every year. We share it with the parties to the conflict, including with the government of Israel. These lists are shared by UNRWA with parties to the conflict and also with the occupying power and with the host governments and also with the government of Israel.
Our coverage of Israel's war on Gaza continues in a few minutes, including we'll be showing you a slice of life in Gaza. To being thrust into the world of war reporting, we profile Gaza's content creators. Stay with us. Hello, you're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha and our continuing coverage of Israel's war on Gaza. But first, let's take a look at some of the day's other top news stories now. And Poland's opposition parties have signed a coalition deal after collectively winning last month's parliamentary elections. It paves the way for them to form a new government, but they'll have to wait. The current governing party received the most votes, but fell short of a majority and is expected to fail in its efforts to form a government. The opposition coalition is looking to strengthen Poland's international position and ties with the European Union.
Sprawy idą w dobrą stronę.
We can confidently promise everyone that we will work together as one strong team to manage Polish affairs throughout the entire term of office for 4 years. This is what we agreed on.
Iceland has declared a state of emergency after a series of powerful earthquakes raised fears of a volcanic eruption. The quakes hit the country's southwestern Reykjanes Peninsula, though thousands of people have been asked to evacuate as a precaution. One of Iceland's biggest tourist attractions, the Blue Lagoon, has also closed temporarily because of the seismic activity. In Myanmar, a surprise offensive by armed groups has blocked 2 strategically important roads to its biggest trading partner, China. Fighting has been ongoing for 2 weeks across the northern Shan state, which the UN says has displaced tens of thousands of people. The cross-border blockage on trade routes has already led to higher prices in markets.
We are highly concerned about the conflict in northern Myanmar. Myanmar and urge all parties there to immediately cease fire and stop fighting to ensure security and stability along the China-Myanmar border.
In the U.S., the FBI has seized electronic devices belonging to New York City Mayor Eric Adams. It's part of a corruption investigation into the financing of his 2021 election campaign. Authorities are looking into potentially illegal donations from the Turkish government and others. Adams says he will continue to cooperate and that he has nothing to hide. And time now for a look at the latest sports headlines. Here's Gemma Nash.
Sri Lanka's cricket board has been suspended by the sport's governing body, the ICC, over government interference. Earlier this week, the country's sports minister sacked the board over the men's team's poor performance at the Cricket World Cup, but a court in Sri Lanka overturned that decision. The suspension won't have any immediate serious impact on Sri Lankan cricket, as there's no matches taking place in the country until December. The father of Liverpool's Luis Diaz says he was well cared for during his 12 days in captivity. Luis Manuel Diaz was released by a Colombian guerrilla group after being kidnapped in the north of the country and made an emotional return to his hometown. Karim Benzema scored his first hat-trick in the Saudi Pro League as Al Ittihad beat Abha 4-2 in their first match since sacking coach Nuno Espirito Santo. The Saudi champions dismissed Nuno on Tuesday after reports he'd fallen out with Benzema, as well as a poor run of results. Al Ittihad move up to 5th in the table, 11 points off leaders Al Hilal. And Lionel Messi has celebrated his 8th Ballon d'Or with the Inter Miami fans. The club held a special ceremony to honour Argentina's World Cup winner. Messi is the first active Major League Soccer player to win the award. Those are the latest sports headlines. You can get more on our website, aljazeera.com, and on our...
Before this assault on Al-Shifa Hospital, Gaza's largest, doctors were warning of a health disaster because of lack of fuel, clean water and basic medicines. Let's take a look at the facility now closer. Palestinians call Shifa the House of Healing. It's Gaza's largest medical complex. Israel says it's Hamas's command center, but doctors and international health workers have disputed that. Al-Shifa has specialized surgical, internal medicine, obstetrics and gynecology facilities. It has a capacity of 700 patients, but since the war began, it's been treating more than 5,000 patients, and tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians are sheltering there. Earlier, I spoke to Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan, a pediatric intensive care doctor, and she works with Doctors Without Borders, MSF. She said a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding in Gaza.
I've been lost for words. I mean, it's been weeks that we have been warning or heralding a humanitarian catastrophe. And every day our calls get more and more desperate. Every day we call for international protection. Every day we have tried to appeal to whatever humanity people have left to intervene. And as I'm listening to the news unfold, because I haven't been able to contact many of our colleagues since yesterday, as I listen to the news unfold, I feel like I'm living in a nightmare. What is this world that we're living in? A hospital is besieged. It's being targeted. Patients, infants, children, critically ill adults, critically ill children are dying, are being murdered, frankly. This is murder on our watch. And I don't understand where the international community is. I don't understand where international law has gone. I don't understand what we learned from our past. There are museums constructed all around the world to remind us not to repeat the mistakes of our past. And here we are today without the excuse of lack of information, without the excuse of not being able to speak up. Here we are, and it's extremely painful, and it's a stain on our collective humanity.
Dr. Hassan, you say you haven't been able to get in touch with your teams on the ground in Gaza. Before this siege on Al-Shifa and Gaza City today, are you aware of the number of children that were being treated across the hospitals in Gaza, the medical facilities in Gaza City, and what sort of situation they were facing even before this siege began?
No, I don't know the exact number. Frankly, I don't think anybody, including people in Gaza, know the exact number because the number evolves every second. There are thousands of patients that arrive to the hospitals every single day. So this is an evolving number. My understanding from the communications that I've had in the last 48 hours is that the teams feel one of my colleagues sent me a voice note yesterday or the night before to say that they had all been sitting together having dinner or eating something, and the only meal they eat today, this is the medical team, and they were saying how frustrating it was that despite everything they're doing, the patients are dying because their injuries are so severe. They were saying, one mentioned, what's the point? And everyone else said, the point is we dedicated our careers to this. We dedicated our lives to this, and we're going to try to save whoever we can. I don't know the exact numbers. What I do know is that those arriving are arriving in very critical condition.
Now, a Ukrainian woman who was trying to escape Gaza with her 9-month-old baby has had her hopes dashed. Tatiana Tapolova was told her Palestinian husband's name was not on the list of those who can leave.
This fear, there are no words that can describe this fear. You have to see, all the way was scary. I don't want to go from one war to another. I want to go to a third country, wherever they will take us, but I still don't know. Maybe it will be Moldova or Romania. I want to go there. I am not going back home, not to Gaza and not to Ukraine, because of the war. I asked them to please let me leave Gaza, but they said no, the whole family should leave. I can't leave my husband here because his name is not on the list. This is my husband. We've been married for the past 23 years. We have 5 children. How is he not on the list? This is a family. Why do they want to separate our family? My children and I can travel, but my husband no. I have a baby. I can't do it alone in a new country. I don't want to go to my home in Ukraine. I don't know where they will send us.
Now, before the war, Gaza's online content creators mostly documented a light-hearted look at life in the Strip. But since the Israeli bombardment began, they've become the eyes and the ears on the ground for many across the world. And they've gained millions of followers in the process. David Landy has a story.
From sharing the everyday life of a distinctive and ancient culture to now documenting death and destruction, life for these young Palestinian content creators has been upended. Before the war, they gave us a glimpse into a besieged land. At 25 years of age, Bizan has showed everyday life for young women in Gaza.
Society in Gaza is not accustomed to the combat sports for women. Come and try this. Salam.
22-year-old Plestia Al-Akkad, until now her young life was dedicated to advancing women's education. And Motaz Aziza is 24 years of age. Before the bombs, he gave us a colourful picture of Gaza.
What their favorite meal during Ramadan and the food they like the most. So, let's go.
But then one day it all changed for Bizan, Plestia and Motaz.
Also in a place far away from the wind.
They bombed the door of the hospital. They bombed. I've been there before 2 minutes.
They now find themselves thrust into the dangerous world of war journalism, showing Gaza under bombardment through their eyes.
Heading to the place that got striked, and just people gave me these 2 babies.
I'm now going to see the place.
These content creators want the world to see what is happening to ordinary people who had ordinary lives, for their voices to be heard.
We are children like every other child.
Do nothing, bro. We just didn't do nothing.
In spite of the hardship they face and the war around them, people of Gaza are resilient. Unfiltered and difficult to absorb, these brave young Palestinians risk their lives to bring stories to the world where foreign journalists have no access, giving the people of Gaza a voice. Determined to not allow their lives to be erased, every life lost, every home destroyed is a story that must be told. David Landy, Al Jazeera.
All right, stay with us. Our coverage of Israel's war on Gaza continues in just a few minutes on Al Jazeera. We'll have all the latest developments for you. We're back in just a few minutes. Thanks.